There we go. Well, we are here to celebrate today the 75th birthday of our neighbor, NRL CBD. Thank you all so much for coming. I know there's a Redskins game going on. They're winning. Oh, okay, thank you. So there's lots of things you could have chosen to do today, so I'm just happy that you chose to be here to learn more about the Navy base and to celebrate how long the town has had an association with them. In order for this program to have happened, I do have to give a really big thanks to Connie Odell. And everybody knows she wears many hats in town, including the administrative team, community development. She's in charge of the utility billing and special events coordinator. And she knows how to throw a party. So we're very thankful that she's here. And Bob Monroe is volunteer extraordinaire. He's our techie guy for the day, and he is also videotaping this for those who couldn't attend. And we have a newly elected official with us, and I'm happy to welcome a town councilman-elect, Larry Jaworski. Mayor Bruce Wall sends his regrets that he could not be here today. We have with us Mayor-elect Pat Mahoney.
Well, I must tell you, this is my first public appearance as mayor-elect, and my dad was a Navy man, World War II, so I think it's fitting. So I just want to thank everybody for coming here. As Joni said, giving up your Sunday, football, whatever else we do. It's really nice outside, so let's enjoy the show. Thank you.
The history of NRL CBD wouldn't be complete without recognizing the local people who work there. Please stand if you or a family member worked on the base, currently work there, or live there. Later in the program, Connie will be roving with the microphone if you want to say a few words about your experience with the base. For the past few years, I've been conducting a local history group at Twin Beaches Library, right across the creek, which, by the way, I am the branch manager there, and conducting Calvert Conversations, which is the group, is one of the greatest things I get to do. The people who show up are always interested in local history. We throw out a topic, I do a little research, and everybody gets to talk. And so that's what I'm hoping we're going to do today, too. Everybody who comes to the meetings has this keen interest in local history, and they often give suggestions of what do we want to learn about next. And that's where Bob Tate comes in. Bob and Pat have been longtime members of Calvert Conversations, and last summer he brought me abstracts from Labstracts, which was the NRL's newsletter, and they were running retrospective pieces about NRL CBA. And I was reading them, and I was just really struck by the history. Bob worked downtown at NRL for 40-some years. And so he has a close relationship with that end. And before today is over, I hope we're all going to have a closer relationship to our neighbors. One of the pieces that he brought to me said, and I quote, "If a birth date is needed for NRL CBA, the best one is November 13th, 1941. On that day, Mr. G.E. Butler reported aboard as caretaker and set up a bunk in the as-yet unfinished guard room. With somebody in permanent residence, CBA was considered open and ready for business." Well, what was that business? The first radar tests were started just about a month later, 10 days after Pearl Harbor. They tested shipboard radars that were used during much of World War II. At first, the antennas were installed on stationary platforms at the top of the cliff. Later, an inclined railway was built, sloping from the cliff top down to the beach. By means of a movable platform on the tracks, the height of the antenna could be adjusted from sea level to 100 feet, simulating almost any conceivable location on a ship. The sets, once in position, were calibrated for range and bearing against stationary targets across the bay and against aircraft and surface vessels. So here we are, 3/4 of a century later. Roll back the calendar 75 years to 1941, and it was certainly a pivotal time in world history, but also our local history. You know, a famous slogan for the Navy, join the Navy, see the world. It also could be turned around to join the Navy, see the Twin Beaches. Because a lot of them did come and see us. Many people have worked at the base and lived there over the years, and in many respects, they brought the world to us. We were a very small community, and suddenly there are new people working, living, coming to the restaurants. It's been an amazing relationship. And the scientific world of everything that they have accomplished, they've made the world a little bit smaller for each of us. It's really amazing. And I have to tell you, I certainly didn't know that much about the Navy base, but in doing this research for this today, I'm just so impressed of the work that has been done there. So we've been using a lot of initial soup kinds of things already, and let me just, for those uninitiated, I explain NRL stands for Naval Research Laboratory. CBD is the Chesapeake Bay Detachment. In the earlier years, it was called CBA, the Chesapeake Bay Annex. So today you'll hear it referred to both ways, as well as just the Navy base, which is how we've always called it. So I want to start a historical timeline. And if any of you have read a James Michener novel, you know he starts at the very beginning when the land was formed and the surrounding waters. That's what I'm going to do, because it's vitally important to this story. The geography of Randall Cliff at the head of the world-famous Calvert Cliffs is what attracted the Navy's attention. The cliffs were formed layer by layer millions of years ago. The bay had been formed even prior to that. But the cliffs are high, they're relatively secluded, and they're not that far from Washington, D.C. Back to the timeline. When we jump to recorded history, Captain John Smith was the first person to document in English Calvert Cliffs, which he named Ricard's Cliff, I think after his mother-in-law. He kept a diary, he drew maps. In June of 1608, he and his explorers were here, and they probably camped between Fishing Creek and Randall Cliff. So I like to tell everybody, Captain John Smith and his explorers were the first tourists who spent the night in town. Not long after John Smith spread the word, colonial Maryland was established in 1634. And Lord Baltimore had a plan for land distribution in the colony, and that was that manors would be established and tenants would farm the land. Where the Navy base sits now was once part of a colonial land grant given to Major Thomas Truman by Lord Baltimore. When Truman moved to Missouri, and yes, he is part of that famous family, he sold the land to Thomas Blake, and Blake became the High Sheriff of Calvert County. His grandson, Joseph Blake, was a Revolutionary War hero. He and his family are buried on the property on the base, and it's marked with a plaque from the DAR. So the base has a very rich history. In 1894, this town was incorporated. And by 1900, there was a full complement of trains running between here and Washington, D.C. And at the Railway Museum and the Bayside History Museum, we fully document how many people came down to have fun and to play and do all the things that there were to do here. But scientists also came. They came on the train, and then they walked the shores of the bay to get to the Calvert Cliffs to collect and study the fossils. So we've always had kind of a scientific connection too. All right, I'm still on the timeline. 1923, NRL was founded. Thomas Edison conceived the idea of a great research laboratory, and it led to its creation, and NRL has certainly benefited, all of us have. It might be one of Thomas Edison's greatest legacies. So what does NRL do? In their own words, we are explorers. As a specialized laboratory for the United States Navy, we are driven to discover. Our research takes us from the depths of the ocean to the edges of the galaxy, producing powerful results that benefit both military and civilians alike. We are protectors. With the mission of ensuring the safety of our armed forces, we've made advancements that impact all humankind. Our work in storm prediction, hazardous chemical detection, and protection against oil spills, for example, is creating a safer world. We are futurists. In an era of constant, often dramatic change, our research in emerging areas like virtual reality, superconductivity, automated systems, and nanotechnology gives the United States Navy the strategic and tactical edge needed for success in today's environment. That's just an overall snapshot of NRL. Now let's watch the video of the 75-year history of NRL-CBD prepared by their Strategic Communications Office under the guidance of Victor Chen, Jonathan Sunderman, and photo archivist Gail Thornton.
Since 1941, the Chesapeake Bay Detachment's, or CBD's, mission, as originally conceived, was to provide facilities and services for test, development, and evaluation of radio, radar, and fire control equipment. Because of the elevation of the base, it was easy to construct facilities to test radar antennas at essentially masthead height. The detachment benefited from unobstructed, overwater ranges and by surrounding territory suitable for most types of airplane courses. Due to its unique location on the shores of the Chesapeake Bay, CBD performed radar measurements and various other experiments in conjunction with the Tillman Island site, just 16 kilometers across the bay. Starting with tests of the first production model radar late in 1941, many types of detection, ranging, and fire control devices were tested at CBD during the war years. The Chesapeake Bay Detachment has played a significant part in supporting the United States Navy and the Marine Corps. Over the years, CBD expanded work into other fields such as radar measurements, characterizing aircraft and ship radar targets, and studies related to all aspects of shipboard safety, particularly related to flight decks, submarines, and interior ship configurations. Examples of recent work at Chesapeake Bay include oyster restoration and revitalization efforts, and test and research in the effects of lithium battery fires. Its range radar facility, together with the Maritime Navigation Radar Test Range at Tillman Island, continue to provide the emitters and analysis tools for developing comprehensive maritime domain awareness capabilities. In conjunction with the ex-USS Shadwell, CBD and Shadwell remain the Navy's only full-scale damage control research, development, test, and evaluation sites.
That was so nice of NRL to prepare that for us. And with us today is Jamie Baker, who has been sent here from NRL to document what we're doing, and she's a photographer who lives here in Huntingtown. So that's nice. Welcome, Jamie. Well, the video gives us a lot of key words to think about, and I'm not technical at all, but I want to share an additional passage I found on the importance of the geography of the base's location. The work there achieved a major breakthrough. Up until the 1940s, radar's range was limited by the curvature of the Earth. NRL developed means of extending that range radar out to 2,000 nautical miles, and by 1955 was able to observe nuclear explosions and the launch of rockets at long range. In 1961, a high-power radar was installed at CBD that, according to an NRL document, was able to detect and track aircraft as they traveled across the Atlantic. This had never been done before. This experimental radar, called MADRE, which stands for Magnetic Drum Radar Equipment, has nearly all the fundamental capabilities of the high frequency over the horizon radar, and it demonstrates it all the time. Aircraft detection and track, ship detection, missile launch detection, nuclear test location, sea state determination, storm tracking, and vectoring aircraft to intercept. Now, I don't know about you, but this big radar is the big red and white one that sits high atop the hill. If you're out on the bay, it's like a beacon. And to me, it always means I'm almost home. And of course, I never knew it had a name till I was studying up on this. And the MADRE, I've just decided now, every time I see it, I'm just going to say, gracias, madre. And I assume they call it madre. I don't know. 10 years ago, Mary Crew wrote the town newsletters when they first started. And I have drawn heavily from her summer 2006 edition because it was the first time I had ever read anything in print about the history of the base. People come into the library all the time and they say, what the heck do they do down there? Who are they? Why are they there? And so for 10 years I've had something to hand to people and say, you know, this is what they do, and it has a great history. So I've asked Mary for her permission to quote a lot of what she wrote in that newsletter. So as I've already mentioned, with this impending war and this great scientific breakthrough called radar, they were really the triggers that led to the base being established. In England and the United States, scientists on both sides were working on radar. Dr. A. Hoyt Taylor was superintendent of NRL's radio division, and he needed a field site for testing. He needed to test over the water, and he needed little radio interference. And where they were in Washington wasn't adequate. either for experimentation or, use of equipment the size that they needed. So combined with the war going on in Europe and the development of radar, the Navy needed to get radars aboard ships as fast as possible. They had to be built and tested. They had the instruments, they had the know-how, just the space is what they needed. Ships were also not available for testing at this time, as you can imagine, so the Bureau of Ships gave NRL the go-ahead in 1940 to find and purchase a testing site that would be free from interference, have frontage on a navigable waterway, and yet be close enough to Washington to permit commuting and testing the same day. 4 men, led by Rear Admiral H.G. Bowen, were assigned to the search. They tramped along the shores of Chesapeake Bay, and they finally chose a 20-acre cornfield that ran up to the brink of a 100-foot cliff. Here was the height needed to simulate radar antenna locations aboard ship. A 10-mile span of deep water lay immediately in front of them, and to the east and the southeast lay open bay that was stretched as far as the eye could see. And it measured 42 miles from NRL. All but the last couple of miles were on hard surfaced roads, and there were dirt roads kind of leading into town. Conveniently, there was a sign on that place, and it said, "For sale." So it all just kind of happened. Today, CBD occupies 168 acres, and as noted in the video, the Tillman Island site is just 16 kilometers across the bay, and right here in town, the CBD boat dock is a small craft berthing dock that you probably pass every day. The craft are used for research and transportation to Tillman Island. Later in the program today, Chairman of the Chesapeake Beach Oyster Cultivation Society, Mr. John Bacon, will tell you about a very recent agreement with CBD, which is very exciting. From Mary Krug's article in the Town newsletter, written in 2006, she interviewed Barbara Grosvenor. And this is one of the really true values of oral histories and documenting when you talk to people, because we have it forever. And Barbara was talking about her husband, Albert, who was a senior scientist on the base. They are both deceased, and I would just love to talk to both of them right now. I'm sure many of you remember Barbara and Al. They told Mary about their experiences in the 40s, what it was like working there, getting there, raising a family there. Originally, the scientists assigned to CBA, which is what it was called then, they commuted by bus from NRL on Monday mornings. They went over the narrow, winding roads. They had improvised sleeping arrangements. Then they returned to NRL at the end of the week. Remember, gas was being rationed at the time. A lot of things during the war weren't exactly as they had been, and Barbara even noticed in her remembrances that even the park in Chesapeake Beach was closed because of the war. They also had nothing but radio contact. Barbara said there wasn't a lot of communication going on. So because the housing conditions and the isolation made it so difficult to retain staff, NRL moved some cottages, winterized them, and started encouraging families to move to the beach. So as the need for additional military and civilian personnel increased, so did the housing. By 1945, which is a very short time after they opened, the resident population had risen to nearly 100. Stuart King recently showed me a picture of the sailors who lived on the base in barracks, and Stuart and Kathy will be in the lobby afterward to share his album, and hopefully he'll tell us a little bit about his experiences working on the base too. Albert Grosvenor continued working on the base until 1971. And like many families who came here to work, they decided they wanted to stay. Calvert County became their permanent home. Several romances can be attributed to the base. Sailors came into town by bus, partied a little bit, at least that's what I heard Clara make. They met their future wives, and the rest is history. They increased the population of Calvert County. And I hope to hear from some of you who know more about that romance of the base than I do. Builder Finland was also interviewed for the town newsletter, and she recalled how several local women took the women of the base under their wings, providing social engagement as well as opportunities for educational get-togethers. They started the Rachawino Homemakers. Rachawino stood for Randall Cliff, Chesapeake Beach, West Beach, and North Beach. My mother was a member, and she made lifelong friends with the women of the Navy base in Rachawino. Many of these same women decided to start a nursery school for the children who lived on the base, but also for the children in town. It was housed in the guardhouse, which still stands on the property across from Westfield. It had a fenced-in play yard at the time, and I'm not sure how else that abandoned guardhouse has been used ever since, but I know that's where I got my diploma for successfully completing 4 years of nursery school. I was evidently dragged along with older siblings. I know there were other people in the room who attended that nursery school. Would you like to raise your hand? Yep. They're the ones that dragged me along. Anyway, they were such good memories. Our teachers were Mildred Finland and Alice Pratt, and it's probably why we have a good knowledge of nursery rhymes to this day. The mess hall had an obvious purpose, but it has also been used over the years as the meeting place for Boy Scout Troop 422. I remember going to parties in the mess hall. I remember my parents going to New Year's Eve parties there. The base actually became the social magnet for people to want to go there. So one of the really fun parts of preparing for today was I talked to friends who lived on the base, and it was a great trip down memory lane for me and for them. Mary Lou Conlon Crefassi, her dad, Bob Conlon, was a civil engineer who was CBA's Director of Public Works and lived with his family on the base, 53 to 63. When they decided to make Calvert County their permanent home, they moved off base, but Mr. Conlon continued his work there 20 more years. Mary Lou and I met in nursery school and then continued through 12 years of public education in Calvert County schools. I asked Mary Lou, what was it like to live there? And she said it was idyllic. We had streams to cross, woods to wander in, vines to swing on, and a tennis court covered with rose bushes. I remember being dropped off for sleepovers, and I took my roller skates and my bicycle because we were going to roam all over the place, and we did. Now you have to remember, this was the first gated community in Chesapeake Beach, and the gates at the guard were armed. It was a little different, but it was good. One of the guards at the base was Carl Denton, and I was very friendly with the family, and he often took his family to the movies, because in the big white building, which is Building 75, they showed movies, and it was one of the perks of working on the base and having someone as a friend who could take you there to watch movies. They only cost 15 cents, as I recall, and it was just very exciting to go there. And I see some heads nodding. You were there too. Good. Well, we're going to hear from you later too. I remember swimming at the base. Of course, we swam in the bay at the picnic grove in the hollow. but they also had 2 pools. And the pool I remember swimming in, it was freezing cold water, all the same depth, which was very deep, and it was fresh water. And we had grown up swimming in a saltwater pool. So I really remember that fresh water stung my eyes. I understand now, as I'm reading through all of this information, those pools were really reservoirs for fire suppression, but they constructed them for swimming and included ladders because they knew they had families on the base. When I talked to Linda Slusher Young, whose father was the fire chief, she said living there was like being on a resort. She lived there 62 to 80. She loved the pond for ice skating, the bowling alley, the basketball court, and of course crabbing and finding fossils. The mess hall had a pool table the kids could use. Her mom was a telephone operator on the base, 69 to 80. And Linda's family also has one of the romances of the base. Her brother Richard married Cynthia, the girl next door in West Quarters, which a lot of you remember probably seeing the housing on the west field that they called W Quarters, which are no longer there. Well, Richard and Cheryl got married at Union Church in North Beach. Many families of the base filled the pews of the churches in Calvert County. They were welcomed additions to the community. They also contributed to the local economy, frequenting stores, local businesses, and restaurants. There was a time in our history in town where we did pretty much know everybody in town. And I can remember walking into a local restaurant at lunchtime, and if you saw a table of 10 or 12 people, you just kind of knew they were from the Navy base. Because they had to go someplace for lunch, and they still do. So it's always been a wonderful give and take between us and the base. They're part of our fabric and the stories we tell. So one more story. Another family I fondly remember on the base was the Bramletts. All wonderful people. Mrs. Bramlett has a lovely English accent, and I'm really sorry none of them could be here today. And I won't try to mimic her accent, but she's great fun to be with.
Yeah, the accent.
I remember being at a birthday party there. It was this summer. It was a Friday, and I've forgotten which of the kids' birthday it was, but I filled my plate with potato chips and pickles, and Mrs. Bramlett said to me, "Why aren't you eating a hot dog?" And I said, "Because it's Friday." And she said, "Oh, you can eat meat here on Friday. I give you naval dispensation." So I kind of wanted to go there every Friday. Another direct impact of the base has been the protection and maintenance of Fishing Creek Harbor. Because of their boat dock, they built the jetties in the 40s. And they continue to maintain the harbor with the Army Corps of Engineers. So that little dock down there is a very important piece of what happens here. The relationship with boat captains and watermen is good, and the relationship with those protecting oysters is solid. So with that, I invite John Bacon to come up and tell us what's happening.
Let's see, what does it say here?
Don't read mine.
I'm trying to read it. I'm John Bacon, and I'm the chairman of the Chesapeake Beach Oyster Cultivation Society. And we're about 6 years old. And our job is to restore the oysters in the Chesapeake Bay. And we've been doing that now at a rate of about 100,000 oysters a year. But that is a very small part of all of the oysters that are needed for the Chesapeake Bay. And we put our oysters after 1 year of being housed under the Fishing Creek Trail, or the Chesapeake Beach Railway Trail as it's formerly known. We put them out on what is the Old Rock Reef. Old Rock Reef is about a mile that way, into about 20 feet of water. One of the very interesting things that we have decided to do is to work with our elementary school program called Chessbacks. And the 5th graders from all of Calvert County come to the Chesapeake Beach Railway Trail for a field trip after they've had a very comprehensive in-school program on oyster cultivation and the reasons for oysters to be in the Chesapeake Bay. And we're currently in the process of hosting those students for this fall, and Mr. Ron Draper has been a key person in getting everything set up and the like for this program. And he told us just an hour ago that we're going to probably have around 800 students this year, which means after 5 years we've had probably around 3,500 to 4,000 fifth graders from Calvert County come to our school, come to our trail. The interesting thing is that they see everything in the oyster cycle from the larvae, which are the size of poppy seeds, up through spat-on shell to mature oysters. The one thing they do not see is the oyster reef. Because it's a mile offshore, we would have to have all kinds of boats with all kinds of protection and the like. And then we'd have to look down through 20 feet of bay water to find the oyster reef. Remember, in the past history, the oyster reef was so deep that it would catch boats on it, but not anymore. It's 20 feet down. So we decided to start to work with the Navy, and you saw a little clip here about what we were doing back in early in 2011 and 2012. And that is to think about using the Navy Pier as a spot where we could take our students down to the pier, and it's only 6 feet of water at the mean low level, mean low tide, and we would be able to show them an oyster reef right next to the Navy Pier, whereas we can't do that now in 20 feet of water a mile offshore. And time has progressed now since 2011, and we are in the very, 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 very final stage of getting this program operational. We have permission from the Navy Research Laboratory commander to utilize the pier area, and we have permission to bring down our students for field trips, which they will then be able to go and take a look at the oyster reef right next to, and they will be able to tong up oysters and put them up on the pier so that they can actually see what a mature oyster reef will look like, and they can measure and count the oysters each year as we go along. Interesting point about this is that one of the areas that we have had trouble with or concern with is that there is oyster sanctuaries all along the western shore here, and they run from just out south of our Fishing Creek area to north to Harrington Harbor. And then there's another oyster bar reef that runs south from the Plum Point area down to Solomon's Island. And there's a gap in between. And this gap is that's a very interesting gap, because we've often wondered, why is there a gap between this oyster bar up here and this oyster bar down here? And it turns out it's the Navy. And it's the Navy protected, restricted, prohibited, stay away from our area or we'll shoot you type thing. No, so they couldn't ever put a sanctuary all the way along the western shore, so they had to have this little space. We now have permission from the Department of Natural Resources and the Navy to put our little sanctuary in there. But the nicest part about this whole thing is that sanctuary will be forever, because the Navy will make sure that there's nobody in there. Thank you.
relationship continues. I hope today I have captured, along with everybody else's help who put this together, not only the 75-year history of the base, but also some of the scientific, social, and cultural benefits we have all gleaned from it. The base has provided work for so many people, and so many of those relationships have lasted so long. There are many things in life that I divide into two parts: the visible and the invisible, the things I understand, the things I don't understand. So I would just like to say, being not that scientific, I have no idea how a radio works. I just know, or need to know, how to get to the channel I want. I don't have any idea how radar works, except when I get stopped for speeding. That only happened once. And GPS, Global Positioning System, I don't know how many of us know how that works, but I would guess the majority of us have a GPS receiver that we use all the time. I don't know who invented that or where, but my guess is right down the road had a lot to do with it. And we thank them for everything that they started out having military purposes were then shared with the rest of us. And we owe a debt of thanks to all of the researchers around the world who have made it a better world for us, but especially NRL75 on this, their 75th birthday. Now, if you would like to tell other people what your relationship has been, Connie has the microphone, or if you don't want to use the microphone, you don't. But this is one of the hallmarks of Calvert Conversations. We all get to talk. If you don't want to share a story here, we're going to adjourn immediately to the lobby where Connie has provided cake and hot cider and cold cider and other beverages if you want. That means water. But anyway, I want us to have a good time talking about the base. And thank you all so much for coming. Claire May's going to tell
I
us
guess I'll
something.
be first.
Claire May, would you mind?
I
Can you
guess,
talk on
okay.
this?
I
Because-
guess I would be a legacy. When my dad went to work there during the war, he was in charge of the heating, the plumbing, anything that was going on, he was under, I guess it was called Public Works. There is a lady here that her mother was their secretary. Also, he worked with Stuart King's uncle, but most of those people have passed. My dad died of a heart attack in '68, but I would like to say I swam in that pool. I skated on it in the wintertime. I fell in it with the commander's daughter when we weren't supposed to be on it. I went in the buildings that my dad worked in. He took us in that big tower. I think I might have went a foot off the ground, and I said, no thank you, but he worked in all those. And I did have some pictures I brought of my dad receiving an award down there. And the base people were wonderful people. I have kept in touch with some of them that are still living, and they often talk about Chesapeake Beach, and that makes me feel good. But it was West Beach back in those days, and that base has contributed a lot to us. And we should all be very proud that we are associated with the Naval Research Lab, and none of us will ever know all that goes on. Thank you. You can get up there. Your father was the first. Get up there and speak to him.
I'm Stuart King,
Hold it real close, because we want
and
to catch this.
I worked there for 20 years. I worked on about everything that Joni showed on the thing here. I had worked on most of it, and I retired on disability. At the barge in the creek now, I put the platform on it where they could set all the radar and stuff on it, as it goes there today, and that's all I got to say.
You and Dad was the first guard there.
Yeah, my father was the main head guard down there,
Yes.
and in the fire department too. So that's all. Thank you all. Thank you.
Just make sure you talk into the mic as much as you can, because we are trying to audio record all of this also, so we have it.
I'm John Regis, I live in North Beach. This is a very specific memory that I have about the Chesapeake Bay Annex, is what it was called back in those days, 1960. And I had just graduated from the University of Maryland as a math teacher. And so I had a summer job working at Naval Research Lab in Washington at Blue Plains. And I worked for the space surveillance section of Naval Research. And our mission was to keep track of all the objects in space, the artificial objects in space. Now there's hundreds and hundreds of them, but at that time there were only a couple of dozen. But anyway, the story I have to tell, when I was watching the video, they didn't make any reference on it to the fact that there was an equatorial mount telescope at the annex here. And that's something they didn't have at the NRL up in Blue Plains, an equatorial mount telescope. That's a telescope that is mounted in a plane parallel to the equator. And the advantage of it is, if you look through the telescope, it turned in the same plane and at the same rate as the Earth did. And that's where this story comes in. One of my co-workers and real good friend, Bernie Kaufman, who worked at Naval Research with me that summer, we got summer jobs there. I was a GS7 mathematician trainee, even though I left in August to go teach school. And I worked there 2 summers. But anyway, Bernie was working on a project where he had to photograph the night sky. I forget the details of his project. And if you take a time photo of the night sky over a period of a couple of hours, you know you're going to get streaks in it because of the star background moving. Well, with an equatorial mount telescope, that doesn't happen because the telescope is moving the same speed as the Earth is moving and in the same plane as the equator of the Earth. So he needed to use the equatorial mount telescope for his project. So he had to spend all night with the shutter open, getting whatever it was he needed to get. And he didn't want to be there by himself, so he invited me to go with him. So we came down here one night and down to the annex. He set up his telescope and had his experiment going, and I was just kind of sitting around not doing much. And he pulled out a pair of very powerful field glasses, and he focused in on something in the sky, and he said, "Here, look at this." And what I saw, I will never forget. It was the planet Jupiter, and the 4 largest moons of Jupiter. Jupiter has about 50-something moons, I think. But the 4 largest ones were known even to Galileo, actually. Let's see if I can name them. Ganymede, Europa, Io, and Callisto. And so Jupiter appeared as a quite large disk in the field glasses, and on either side of it were 2 moons, Ganymede and Callisto, and Io and Europa, all lined up in a line across Jupiter. And it was a remarkable, remarkable sight. I'll never forget it. And it was right down here in Chesapeake Beach.
Thank you. Anyone else? Joe, I'm going to pass it over to you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Joe Johnson. I was lucky enough to work at the Naval Research Lab with Bob for a total of 40 years. I arrived there as a small, with a small engineering group, and our job was to build Airby rocket experiments, hoping to find X-ray sources. They had tried a few and they had failed. We were to build 3, hoping at least 1 would work, and all 3 worked, and that was the beginning of X-ray astronomy. My mother-in-law actually worked as a secretary for the radar division, and that was back when we had carbon paper and typewriters. So if you wonder what research does for us, just think about today. The best way to think of the Naval Research Lab as an incubator. Society takes its best and brightest, a smart society, and they put them in an incubator, and they give them money, and they give them support, and they give them whatever they need to take us to the next level. And that is what NRL did and does. And I was fortunate enough to spend my adult life working with some of the smartest people in this country. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Well, did you want to say something?
Yeah, probably not that important. Hi, my name's Griff Harrison, although some of you in here know me by a different name. Just to show you what kind of a small world it is, many years ago, my wife Diane and I moved into West Springfield. And so this fellow next to us, I got to know him, his name was Dale Schuler. I never asked where he worked. Only I know his doctorate wasn't in medicine. It was in, one of the scientific areas. So I got talking to him one day, and he was telling me about going down to this wonderful place down on the bay called Chesapeake Beach. And I said, oh gosh, I know where that is. Well, come to find out, he was doing experiments down here at the Naval Research Lab. And he wouldn't really tell me exactly what he was doing, but because he couldn't. But I do know that he had set up a interchange between here and the Tillman's Island, and he was working on that. And a friend we go to church with actually knew him and worked with him, named Larry Phelps. And so one day they're doing something, and Dale was the kind of guy, if he got excited, his octave voice went up about 4 or 5 times, and they were not raising a target or something over there quick enough for him, and all of a sudden you hear over the radio, "Run out, get back, get back, get back!" And of course the old country boys will tell us, "Oh, in the world was that?" But anyway, just to show you what a small world it is. And I know one of the things he was trying to do, I don't think this is classified, is they were trying to develop I guess you'd call it a perpetual machine that was actually propelled by the waves. So that as the waves came in, it would come up and go down and go up, and start the process of a generator, like they do with dams and so forth. But I don't think they ever got that to work. But I used to go over to Navy base when Commander Arch was there, because I was friendly with his son, and we used to go over there and play basketball and so forth. And it was a fun time to go over there every now and then. So thank you.
Thank you.
You're not done yet.
Oh,
You're not done yet. I just have to say that it was a fun time, and for every single one of my brothers and sisters, some of our best friends lived on the base, and it opened up our worlds. I thought my heart would break when Rebecca Ridgway, Commander Ridgway, was transferred elsewhere. The Conlins were Joni and Freddie's friends. The Finnerans were Diane's friends, and Bob Bramlett was Gerald's friend. And they added so much to our community. I think everyone there expanded our horizons, and we had no idea. We were kids. We had no idea what really a crucial role the Navy base was playing. We really still don't know. But we didn't know them, and it was an adventure to go there. And I think this is a wonderful program to celebrate their being a part of this community for 75 years. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I say let the celebration continue
Yeah.
with goodies. Thank you all so much.